It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. We're getting up to speed on developments at the state capitol with WPR's politics team. We'll check in on the state budget process as the legislature's budget writing committee voted to remove hundreds of items from Governor Evers' proposed two-year spending plan. Here's Joint Finance Committee co-chair, Republican State Senator Howard Markline on WISN's Upfront.
We're taking out the policy out of the budget. I believe those items should be debated not by 16 members of the Joint Finance Committee, but ought to be separate legislation and go through the legislative process.
But first, two law firms are asking the Wisconsin Supreme Court to overturn the state's congressional maps and redraw boundaries ahead of the 2026 midterms, arguing the current maps unfairly favor Republicans. To break things down, we called in WPR's Capitol Bureau Chief, Sean Johnson. Sean, welcome.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, and state politics reporter Rich Kramer is here. Rich, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
Rich, let's start with you. So last week, two lawsuits come down challenging the state's congressional maps. What are the distinctions of these two cases?
Okay, so the first lawsuit came from a group called a Democratic law firm called Elias Law Group. That one claims that Wisconsin's 8 congressional voting districts are so gerrymandered in favor of Republicans that they essentially violate Democrats' free speech and association rights under the state constitution. They say even though Democrats and Republicans have gotten roughly the same number of votes in recent statewide elections, the maps are so slanted toward the GOP that they've been able to hold 6 of Wisconsin's 8 congressional districts. The second lawsuit comes from a group called the Campaign Legal Center and takes a much more narrow approach when arguing that the congressional voting map is unconstitutional. They say it doesn't have the same number of voters in each of the 8 districts, and it also claims that more counties were split by these congressional district lines than necessary. The congressional map was actually drawn by Democratic Governor Tony Evers, but under a 2021 directive by the Supreme Court's former conservative majority known as least changes. In essence, what that means is the court told Evers and other parties in the lawsuit to draw maps that make as few changes as possible to a map for the congressional districts that was passed by Republicans a decade earlier.
Some people listening might say, wait, I thought they already redrew these maps. What's going on here? Can you explain the difference between the state's legislative maps and these congressional maps?
Well, it gets a little confusing because there's redistricting lawsuit every other day, it seems. But the case that you just talked about argued that Republican-drawn state assembly and state Senate voting maps were unconstitutional because several chunks of voting districts were uncontiguous. What that means is they were disconnected and located in neighboring districts. The lawsuits we're talking about today, though, focus on the 8 voting districts used to elect members of the U.S. House of Representatives from Wisconsin.
So, Sean, it feels a bit like deja vu with Wisconsin's congressional maps lawsuit because the state Supreme Court rejected a similar suit last year. What's changed?
We don't know what changed because we don't exactly know why the court rejected that case to begin with. This was after the court had struck down the state assembly and Senate maps that Rich was talking about there. And so it seemed like it was maybe ripe for a congressional lawsuit. One was brought and it kind of lingered before the court for a while. Eventually, the court just put out an order and declined to take the case up on what's known as an original action petition, which is basically asking the court to take the case directly rather than have it go through the normal court system. And when a court takes that step, they don't have to say why, and they didn't. And so that's kind of their prerogative. This time, it's back to the drawing board, and they could make a similar step here, or I think these groups are banking on the court is going to view that issue differently this time around.
Can you explain what's at stake, Sean? How competitive are particularly the U.S. House seats in Wisconsin?
And just think about the U.S. House and just the kind of tension in the federal government right now at large. I mean, the House has a very slim Republican majority, and it has voted kind of as one voting block for Republicans more than a lot of people maybe thought a year ago that would happen. And so they've been able to And, to the degree that stuff has gone through the House and now through executive order, they've been able to back up President Trump's agenda. And so Democrats want that majority. They want to put a stop to Republican ideas making their way through Congress. And in Wisconsin, they have a very realistic chance at picking up 2 seats. They could potentially, depending on the cycle and what the electorate is like next November, we don't know, they could potentially win a couple seats that are competitive under the existing map. But if they redraw the map so that it's more competitive, right now you've got a 6-2 Republican majority in Wisconsin's congressional delegation. You could easily see that going to 4-4, and that's 2 seats that whittle away at that GOP majority in Congress.
Are those 2 seats Derek Van Orden's and Brian Stiles that could possibly be in jeopardy?
You got it. I mean, Van Orden has been competitive every year. That's Ron Kind's old seat, and it was competitive when he was there too. And that is definitely one of the primary seats. Brian Stiles' seat in southeast Wisconsin is also competitive by the numbers. He's just managed to do well there, despite a district that gives Democrats a theoretical opening. So those are the 2 that are competitive right now. If the map is redrawn, they could get even more competitive.
We're getting up to speed on developments at the state capitol. That is WPR's Capitol Bureau Chief Sean Johnson. We have state politics reporter Rich Kramer with us. We are going to orient ourselves now to budget season. Sean, starting with you, at last week's Joint Finance Committee, we saw Republicans just pulling out hundreds of items from Governor Evers' 2-year budget proposal. What effect does that have on this process?
Kind of resets it. The governor introduced this budget, as governors do, in February, and traditionally that would be the starting point for all budget negotiations. If the governor put it in there, the legislature, you had to talk about it, you had to vote on it. There was kind of an assumption that that thing that was in the budget had a good chance of staying there. And what Republicans have kind of done with the action that they took last week in that vote is they've said, no, the assumption is that, well, first of all that stuff is coming out, and we are going to decide what the starting point is for budget negotiations. It kind of puts them in the driver's seat more than the governor.
Rich, does that mean that we're going back to base budget in a way? And what do you see that came out of this budget?
Well, some of the things that struck me that came out were I saw something that would have been some funding to replace lead pipes in Milwaukee. That was axed from the budget. There was something from with relation to cybersecurity initiatives for state government that was pulled. But also you're seeing things pulled that get pulled all the time by the Republicans and that have been introduced repeatedly by Governor Tony Evers. Things like, marijuana legalization and those types of Democratic wish list items.
Sean, we do have this budget surplus lingering here. Last estimate, $4.6 billion. We got the Legislative Fiscal Bureau expected to publish revised numbers this week. Is there any clarity on how the surplus might be used in the new budget?
I think a lot of it is going to be, $4.6 billion is a huge amount of money, and that's a problem that many lawmakers and governors in the past would have loved to had. But it's something that this governor and this legislature have dealt with for a couple budgets now, where they've had this big surplus, and it's still there because they kind of can't figure out what to do with it. Republicans, generally speaking, want to use it all up on tax cuts. The governor has wanted a mix of tax cuts and a big increase in education funding, and they're kind of still in that position. It's not as big as it seems, though, because there were a lot of programs in Wisconsin that were funded with federal money during the pandemic. And so the state kind of has to backfill those programs if they want to continue them. And, there's also the added kind of uncertainty of what's happening with federal funding going forward and whether Wisconsin is going to get as much as, it was used to in the past if there are big budget cutting measures in Washington. If
those go through, that could totally upend the budget. I would imagine there could even potentially be money held back or an alternate budget. What do you hear?
So what we've heard from Republican co-chairs of the Budget Committee is that it's just business as usual right now, that they're not going to wait to see what happens in Washington. They'll craft their budget based on the best available information. And so that's the official word as of right now. But when you're talking about the amount of money that Wisconsin gets for programs like Medicaid or for transportation, those decisions in Washington will have a huge effect on decisions here in Madison. And so, whether or not they wait for them, it will have a trickle-down effect at one point or another.
Rich, the state Supreme Court upheld the governor's partial budget veto powers last month. That came out of him using that veto pen to strike digits and a hyphen in a budget line that extended school funding for hundreds of years. Will Republican lawmakers put numbers in their budget this time around? Do you anticipate any potential effect from that?
I've learned that it's a fool's errand for me to try to anticipate what lawmakers do sometimes. But, a Republican Assembly Speaker, Robin Vos, has mused about maybe having to write up the budget differently to avoid Evers' powerful partial veto pen. That's something they've already been kind of doing, but Vos also hinted that the budget drafting process could be delayed. This was all at least a month or two ago, and as Sean said, things appear to be on track. So we'll see what the product looks like from the Republicans.
All right, July 1, we come closer every day. Rich and Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Rich Kramer is WPR's state politics reporter. Sean Johnson is WPR's Capitol Bureau chief. We've been talking about the latest developments in state politics with the budget writing process and lawsuits from Democrats challenging Wisconsin's congressional maps. Coming up on Wisconsin Today, elite high school athletes in the state may now enter into name, image, and likeness deals.
It allows them to start getting experience and exposure to the professional world, something that most elite athletes don't have the advantage of doing.
The new frontier for NIL in Wisconsin communities, that's ahead on WPR News. You're listening to Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. This week, WPR is reporting on the development of data centers around Wisconsin and the impacts they could have on communities and the state. The first phase of Microsoft's $3.3 billion data center campus in Mount Pleasant is set to come online next year. And We Energies says it plans to build a new gas-fired power plant in response to surging energy demand, mostly driven by data centers. Danielle Kading reports those plans are raising concerns that residents will face pollution and higher costs for decades to come.
Brianna Allen Kaiser lives blocks away from the South Oak Creek coal plant owned by We Energies, just south of Milwaukee.
So our local park is right there, and it's literally behind it.
The plant's last coal units are set to come offline this year. In its place, the utility plans to build a roughly $1.2 billion gas plant. The facility would cut carbon emissions by roughly 3.5 million tons compared to the coal plant. But Kaiser says clean energy is a better option.
It makes me very nervous and also scared for my own child, who is only 12, of what his future looks like if we just continue to allow companies like this to come in and pollute the air.
We Energies is planning more than $2 billion in natural gas projects to meet growing power demand that's mostly driven by Microsoft. Tech companies have been racing to build data centers to support artificial intelligence. Dan Kruger is an executive vice president with WEC Energy Group, which owns We Energies. He says they're forecasting 1,800 megawatts of new power demand.
This set of new plants that we're planning produce far less emissions, use less water, meet demand for current and future load growth, and really should support economic development for all of us here in Wisconsin.
As demand for electricity soars, environmental advocates have been speaking out against the utility's plans to power data centers with fossil fuel plants at rallies like this one in March. Clean Wisconsin Air and Energy Manager Kieran Gallagher says data centers can be mainly powered by clean energy.
By building and investing in these plants, we are locking in potentially decades of further burning of fossil fuels with the air pollution impacts, as well as sending us on a path that does not mitigate against the worst of climate change.
Burning a moving gas traps 80 times as much heat as carbon dioxide in the short term. Governor Tony Evers and We Energies have also set goals to go carbon neutral by 2050. A Microsoft spokesperson says it's not yet possible to get all the electricity its Mount Pleasant data centers need strictly from clean energy. But a Berkeley lab study found a large backlog of mainly clean energy and battery storage projects waiting to connect to the nation's power grid. Those projects have the capacity to produce twice the amount of energy of the nation's current power plant fleet. Researcher John Quigley with the University of Pennsylvania's Kleinman Center for Energy Policy says rules for power grids favor large fossil fuel plants.
And those rules are not changing anywhere near rapidly enough to accommodate new clean energy, which happens to be a lot cheaper and can be built a lot more quickly than fossil fuels.
We Energy says its Oak Creek gas plant is the least costly way to meet the projected energy demand. Critics dispute that. They also question whether the plant is needed. Microsoft has paused work on some of its data center sites at Mount Pleasant, but the company says it's standing by its requested power demand. If built, Tom Content with the Citizens Utility Board says he's also concerned about data centers shifting costs to ratepayers.
There are real extreme examples where customers, homeowners, renters, and businesses around their states are subsidizing affluent tech companies.
We Energies recently asked state utility regulators to approve special rates for large customers like data centers. Kruger says those rates would require companies to pay for infrastructure tied to their projects.
The whole point of it is the power plants, the distribution lines, the high voltage lines, they're working hand in hand with us to make sure that all those costs related to them are paid by them.
Customer advocates argue those rates have yet to be approved. They add people are struggling to pay energy bills due to rate hikes in recent years and rising costs. Brianna Allen Kaiser says her utility bill has grown to more than $200 each month. For her, the Oak Creek gas plant is too costly for taxpayers and public health. Danielle Kading, Wisconsin Public Radio.
This is Wisconsin Today. Late last month, Wisconsin joined at least 40 other states in allowing high school athletes to profit from their name, image, and likeness, known as NIL. But the new rules have a number of restrictions for schools and athletes. To walk us through those restrictions and to see how this change will affect high school athletics in Wisconsin, we have Stephanie Grady, CEO of Influential Athlete. It's a Milwaukee NIL education company that teaches skill sets to help athletes succeed with NIL opportunities. Stephanie, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Eric Plitzowite is here, assistant principal and the athletic director at Waukesha North High School and president of the Wisconsin Athletic Directors Association. Eric, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
Eric, starting with you, what is your understanding of the rules and guidelines for how high school NIL operates?
Well, obviously, this is fairly new to us now. And, with the WIA and with the work that they've done to try to get our membership to understand the rules, I think this will continue to be a work in progress. This allows for student athletes to be paid. At the same time, we have to make sure as athletic directors in our schools that we are giving them the resources and we're giving them the kind of the guidance so that they don't put themselves and their teammates in jeopardy.
Stephanie, what is your role? What do you do at Influential Athlete?
So we do a couple of different things. We serve athletes directly, working with them privately, helping them learn the personal and professional skill sets needed in order to be successful in the NIL landscape, if they want to be, because they need to be more than just a great athlete. they need to be marketable to a business. Businesses and brands need to see them as a potential asset when it comes to their marketing and promotion of their products and services. And so there's additional skill sets athletes need to develop at 17, 18, 19 years old in order to really be that whole package and for businesses to see them as somebody that they would like to partner with. We also work directly with institutions. So we are the exclusive NIL education partner of the WIAA. We've been working with them over the last 7 months, helping to educate the 514 member schools across the state when it comes to the language that was proposed and voted on April 25th. So we spent a lot of time educating athletic directors, superintendents, presidents, and principals at all the schools across the state as to what the language actually means, what their responsibilities would be as administrators, what the student athletes and parents' responsibilities would be, and what the potential repercussions would be if the vote failed again. So now that it's passed, we've started contracting with a variety of individual schools as well as entire athletic conferences across the state of Wisconsin, supporting the administration when it comes to navigating this new landscape and helping them educate their student athletes and families when it comes to these new rules, so that they can start taking advantage of the opportunity NIL offers to them, but they can do so safely, compliantly, and successfully.
How much appetite is there for your consulting in this moment?
A great deal. So NIL, although it's relatively new, it's only been around for 3.5 years, it's only gaining more and more steam. This year, the NIL marketplace is expected to balloon to nearly $2.5 billion, and we're only in year 3, almost 4. And that's the amount of money expected to be paid out to student athletes across the country, high school and college. And so what we really believe is NIL is more than just making money as a college or a high school athlete. What NIL has done is it gives these elite athletes a way that they can start to bridge the gap between their success as an athlete and their success in their next chapter whenever their athletic career comes to an end. It allows them to start getting experience and exposure to the professional world, something that most elite athletes don't have the advantage of doing. They're not getting college internships. They're not getting jobs because of how much time they have to dedicate to their sport. And so NIL is allowing them to start to kind of break into that professional realm a lot sooner. So whenever their playing days come to an end, they're able to continue being a superstar in whatever that chapter is next. So there's a big appetite for it for sure, because I think that both athletes and parents understand that NIL offers athletes so much more than just making money with their name, image, and likeness.
Eric, as Stephanie laid it out there, WIAA membership rejected NIL rules in previous votes. Why do you think it passed this time around?
Well, I think there was a concerted effort on behalf of the WIAA, obviously in partnership with Stephanie and her program to get the information to our membership. There was numerous times where Stephanie would be on Zoom calls with different districts in the state, and just them working with the WIA to try to get our membership to understand the rules as they would pertain to our students in all parts of the state, I think was crucial this time around.
So, Eric, you've been an athletic director in Wisconsin for over 15 years. How do you feel about this going into place?
It's we see it across the state. Serving as president of the state association currently, talking with other states, I know it's something that goes on. And if I take my personal side apart from the bigger picture here, I understand it's something that's coming our way, and I see that. So it's really our job is to try to educate our people, our student athletes, our parents, the best that we can, to make sure that if there is an opportunity for them to capitalize on NIL, that they have the right resources and guide to do that. So it was just a matter of time, I think, in Wisconsin, and here we are. Our membership voted and overwhelmingly supported it.
We're talking about NIL rules for Wisconsin high school athletes, and we have Waukesha North High School Athletic Director Eric Plitzo-White with us and Influential Athletes CEO Stephanie Grady. Stephanie, can you lay out for us what is the difference between a high school NIL contract deal and a college NIL deal?
When it comes to the college level, I'll start there. There's nothing that's been federally mandated as of today across the board. So the NCAA has kind of put some interim rules in place that are more or less minimums for how athletes should conduct themselves and conduct their NIL deals moving forward. That could change, and I'll preface it with that because there's a lot of lawsuits that are currently in the works and they're expected to be judged upon, and it could vastly change the landscape of NIL as we know it at the college level. But I'll explain to you what exists right now in terms of the NCAA's rules. As it stands right now, there are certain activities that athletes cannot promote in specific industries. And this is the same for the WIA's rules. Things like alcohol, cannabis, pharmaceuticals, weapons, things that most student athletes' parents probably wouldn't want them promoting in the first place. But these are protections that are put in place so that athletes aren't collaborating with industries that could have an effect on their reputation and not in the best of ways. Other rules that exist for the NCAA are you have to disclose your NIL deals above a certain monetary value to your university. This is vastly different than how things are written at the Wisconsin level for the WIAA. Student athletes in Wisconsin do not have to disclose their NIL deals to their schools. And there's a really big distinction between what the athletes are doing with their NIL activities and the schools themselves. And the WIA wants that. They want a pure separation between the two. School employees also can't facilitate and manage high school athlete deals. And so they want that big separation between the two. At the college level, it's not the same. The other biggest difference that I'll make mention of between high school and college is that for high schoolers in Wisconsin, you cannot hire an agent or any other representation to represent you in NIL deals, regardless of whether or not they're taking a commission off that deal. At the college level, that's very different. A lot of your most successful athletes with NIL will contract with an agent who will find them deals, negotiate the contracts, and take commissions because of it. So there's parameters put in place by the WIAA to help ensure that kind of the chaos that some people perceive is happening at the college level, things like the transfer portal, kids jumping from school to school, depending on how much money they're getting paid, doesn't happen at the high school level because school employees and anyone that has any sort of vested interest in a school, including alumni, can't be part of NIL deals with student athletes at that particular school for high schoolers.
Eric, with the separation between NIL and the schools, what kind of enforcement mechanism, what kind of guardrails are in place for the WIAA to make sure athletes and schools are following these rules?
Well, I think that's a key point to all of this. I think that's something that we're going to still work on moving forward with the WIA regarding. Rules are the rules, bottom line, and NIL is something that we have to make sure that we stay separate from a student athlete's high school athletic participation. So we have to look out for our entire program. We have to make sure that we are educating as best we can. In the last week, we've done another Zoom meeting with our athletic directors from across the state. We have another one planned next week just to try to get information out. As Stephanie's mentioned, she's working with schools as well to educate. And I think that's the bottom line for us. We have to be diligent to ensure that our rules are followed and hope that the student athletes and parents take care of those rules and they understand it as best they can.
Stephanie, do you think this will be mostly limited to elite high school athletes, or could you see smaller deals in the mix where perhaps a high school quarterback gets $100 from a local restaurant or a car dealership for some social media posts?
That's exactly what the NIL landscape is. It is these smaller deals. And a lot of people have misconception when it comes to NIL because of what you see in the news or on ESPN or on SportsCenter, because news organizations cover the big deals, the 6-7 figure deals, the commercials, because those are attention grabbing, they're headline grabbing. And I understand that. But the vast majority of athletes who are being compensated with NIL deals, yeah, they are for a few $100, or even to begin with, free or discounted products or services in exchange for promotion. And so when it comes to athletes being successful with NIL, you don't have to be the number one recruited quarterback across the country in order to be successful with NIL. It really comes down to how much ambition a particular student athlete may have. We work with D2 and D3 athletes as well who have many NIL deals because they're willing to put themselves out there. They're willing to pitch themselves. They've learned skills that have made them marketable to businesses because they have a level of influence. And I'm not just talking on social media, but they have a level of influence within the communities where they reside, where they live, where they go to school. And businesses see that as something that could be beneficial to them because they have people watching them. They have younger kids who are looking up to them. And that's a potential business's customer base that they're looking to tap into. So I think when it comes to the reality of the NIL landscape, your 6-7 figure deals with athletes, very few are making those. The bigger picture and what the vast majority is are these smaller deals that kids are just stacking together. And yeah, they can make a pretty penny doing so.
Stephanie and Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Eric Plitzowite is athletic director at Waukesha North High School, president of the Wisconsin Athletic Directors Association, and Stephanie Grady is CEO of Influential Athlete. That's a Milwaukee NIL education firm. Still ahead, explore a debut poetry collection from Madison's poet laureate and why this form of expression is so meaningful.
So many poems that have changed my entire life, I have been able to read in 45 seconds. There aren't many other art forms that do that.
The book is called Late to the Search Party. That's next from WPR News. It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. Madison's Poet Laureate is out with their first book of poetry. This collection gives glimpses of a family touched by addiction and terminal cancer, and elegies that cut to the heart, grappling with loss, grief, and belonging. Los Angeles native Stephen Espada Dawson calls Wisconsin home. He came to Madison for a poetry fellowship through the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing, and his debut poetry collection is called Late to the Search Party. Stephen, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Do you have to give yourself permission to write really deep personal things about your life, like your brother going missing and addiction and your mother going through cancer? Was that a moment where you decided that you had to write about those things?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I really have always written to sort of understand how I'm feeling. I think that we have this surface level understanding of, that everyday sort of pulse check. But I think really holding these things up to the light is how you figure out yourself. When you're living with people around you that are going through complicated things, for example, addiction, which is a really sort of large theme of my collection, the shadow of addiction is almost always larger than the individual. Right? Mm-hmm. So I am trying to write within the shadow of these things, whether that's addiction, whether that is in the face of death and decline, to sort of understand where I'm at. I think poetry is a really interesting art form. I come to you as this representative, quote unquote, of poetry, but I don't hold it higher up than any other art form, truly. Mm-hmm. I think for me, it became a lot more approachable because it's a small thing, right? So many poems that have changed my entire life, I have been able to read in 45 seconds, you know, and there aren't many other art forms that do that. I think this sort of what we might sometimes refer to as a small economy of language really challenges you, both as a writer and as a reader. And I definitely wouldn't be where I am today as far as sort of like, you know, like my mental health journey and learning how to live in this world without poetry. I can say that 100%. Now, do I know the boundaries of what poetry is really capable of? I'm still trying to figure that out. But for me, it has been really helpful. And I'm in a lucky position to be able to, teach people how to write poetry and more importantly, how to read poetry. And I can say that it's helped many of them too.
I want to look at the poem Late to the Search Party.
Okay, yeah. So this poem, yes, is the title poem. Oddly enough, it was actually the last poem added to the collection. It was a deep challenge to write. It's a poem that travels a lot, and the sort of impetus for the poem. This is something I was writing this poem for a couple of years, and I did not know how to complete it until after a reading. Someone in the audience asked me an incredibly personal question, which is, if you could see your brother again, would you want that? And, at the time, and maybe still a little bit now, I think that it was a little bit too hot. I think that was a little bit too personal of a question, especially in sort of like a public setting. And I think at the time I just said something like, you're going to have to buy me a drink first before we talk about that, right? But that question did really sort of stay with me. And I realized I had never sort of, I had never sort of answered that in the book. And I eventually decided that I needed to. So the answer, or as close to an answer as you'll get, I think, from me is how this poem sort of culminates at its end.
We are talking with Madison's 7th Poet Laureate, Stephen Espada Dawson. His debut poetry collection is called Late to the Search Party. Stephen, Lake Mendota makes makes a statement in this debut collection as well, has its moment. You're originally from Los Angeles. Many of your poems have these LA references, but why Lake Mendota after sunset?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I would be so disappointed if, Wisconsin Public Radio didn't ask me about my Wisconsin references. So the truth is really that I am kind of a city boy through and through, and nature kind of terrifies me. And I think here, in Wisconsin, and especially Madison, when you're on the Isthmus, you don't necessarily see that lake that has just been this sort of feature of your life the whole time you've lived here, right, as nature. But it is very much, this like really prominent, kind of intimidating thing for me. And it's something that I see, a couple times a day as I am walking my dog in that direction. I'm lucky to be just a couple blocks from the lake. And sometimes I will go out there when the weather permits and just sort of sit with it. And it is really just this big black pit of a thing, and you can't help but to sort of feel magnetized to it, at least me, right? So it does feel like, in a way, when I'm alone with the lake, like we're having a little conversation. Not to brag, but it gets pretty deep out there, so It's so funny because this, in Madison, the lakes here are so normalized that people will just, when I taught at the university, my students who were, late all semester were suddenly showing up early because they were walking across the lake to get to class faster. And that just boggles my mind. If you ever see me out there, please notify the proper authorities because something has gone awry in my life. That is to say that it's become a very new sort of profound symbol for me living here. And I am definitely always sort of writing with my environment in mind.
You were able to see it with fresh eyes.
Definitely. Absolutely. Fresh, sort of worried, astonished eyes.
Okay, so Madison Poet Laureate, what are you wanting to work on in this role and promote in this role? How does it feel?
I'm still feeling surprised. It's been just over a year, and it's still like, oh, really, me? Interesting choice, City. I am, I'm definitely humbled and grateful for that. I did not expect to be chosen, and part of that is because I really don't have a ton of history here. I did go to graduate school in the Midwest, but not in Wisconsin. So I just came here via this little poetry fellowship with university. I kind of applied to this thing via some pressure from some friends, and it sort of happened. I would say my biggest project here continues to involve justice impacted communities here in Madison, in and around Madison. It's sort of my bread and butter when working with the community, and I've got a lot of great projects planned. I've done workshops with these students already through organizations like Odyssey, working with non-traditional students, justice impacted students, and I'm planning actually a really big thing that is tentatively titled the Triptych Project, where I will be, when you're incarcerated, one of the biggest challenges is this understanding that the things that you create inside may never have the voice outside. Right. Yeah. And that can be like really, really discouraging, even dehumanizing to some folks. Right. So I'm trying to take poems that have been created within prisons by super talented incarcerated poets. And I want people on the outside who are justice impacted but living outside of prison to read these poems at an event, and also through the magic of radio, as you all know, I have locked in on a radio program that is really popular at a local prison here.
Oh, wow.
So we are going to have a radio reading that the incarcerated poets who wrote these poems will be able to actually hear. And it's just like a little proof that they are heard, that something that they made is not just art that dies within these little walls, but can echo far outside of the prison.
I wonder if you could do us the honor of reading the poem "Every Word is My Mother's."
Yeah, all right. Every word is my mother's. Every word is my mother's favorite fruit. A billion moths skulk toward their final curtain. Outside my window, each flash of blue is a small death too. That proud bug zapper swung above a neighbor's porch. Mom says she's scared of ladders, not heights. Something about her spine pressed up against the world. While standing outside her hospital door, a crowd of doctors promised me there is no such thing as dying of old age. Every body fails from something more precise. A heart's clumsy rhythm, a tumor's slick migration. I want so badly to write words with a future attached. I'd kiss each one goodnight, tuck them deep inside my friend's dimples. I haven't forgotten there is so much that is perfect. A lover's well-perched hand, Saturn's galactic pizza cutter. Every smile now is an accident I want to apologize for. Over the phone, I hear her, my mother, plucking rubies from a pomegranate. In Spanish, they're called granadas, from grenade. When I ask why, she tells me they explode.
Thank you so much for reading that poem. How does it make you feel?
That's a big poem to the book, and I unfortunately I'm in this poem because I'm in my life, and so there are many things that will always sort of ring loud throughout the day. A couple lines from that poem. I want so badly to write words with the future attached, and also every smile now is an accident I want to apologize for. These things I would consider anchor lines in this book. So thank you for asking me to read this one in particular. I think that I think it's a tough one.
Yeah. Do you have any words of advice for aspiring writers and aspiring poets who can relate to some of these images, who can relate to your story?
Yeah, I would always say that if it's safe for you, and I think that you have to decide what that means, writing towards either your discomfort or writing towards your joy. I think that if you, if something in these poems feels reminiscent of your past or your present, I think whatever art you do, moving towards discomfort to learn more about yourself, or moving towards joy to learn about what is possible for you, I think that will save your life. It did me.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been great.
That is Madison's 7th Poet Laureate, Stephen Espada Dawson. We talked about his debut poetry collection. It's out now, and it's called Late to the Search Party. Thank you so much for listening to Wisconsin Today. And there really is one more thing. We'd love to find out where you'd like to take us next, where the show should go next, and who we should talk to. Considering today we've covered state politics and a poet laureate, rule changes for Wisconsin's high school athletes. So is there a certain topic we should explore more fully? Is there a person we should talk to who could help make us understand an issue more deeply, or they have just this amazing story to tell? Reach out to us, share your thoughts. We read what you send us, we listen to your voicemails, and we really want to know what you think. Email us at wisconsintoday@wpr.org, or you can call or text to get in touch. That number is 888-642-0232. That's 888-642-0232. Wisconsin Today producers include Mackenzie Crummy, Lauren Cox, and Avery Lee Rogers. Our technical directors are Tyler Ditter and Sarah Hopeful. Learn more about us at wpr.org/Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer Kent. You're listening to WPR News.